the TNCs and the e-commerce. Like I said in the previous lecture, e-commerce is a very important industry in the global economy because it produces, it delivers goods to people. It delivered goods before the pandemics. This was a very strong business even before the pandemics. Today, in times of pandemics and lockdowns, social distancing, e-commerce is becoming more and more important. And the leader in e-commerce, I think, and we can see that on chart 1 on this slide, China was the absolute leader in e-commerce sales. Looking at this graph, at this chart, back in 2015, China was the greatest company, the greatest country in terms of e-commerce sales. It outpaced both the United States and Europe. And very interestingly enough, Europe is a very, very slow country, a small group of countries that are very slow to introduce e-commerce. Even during the epidemics, the pandemics, European countries remained very, very stable, very stagnant in terms of e-commerce sales. Their numbers stagnated really. In the United States, these numbers really went up really dramatically, and Chinese e-commerce sales became more like in the United States. So this is a very interesting dynamics here. Also, what we can see is that the largest e-commerce company is the company of China, and this company is Alibaba Group. This Alibaba Group, this internet giant in China, it is a very, very great company with lots of capital, with lots of workforce, with lots of people working for this company. It sells everything, starting from really small household items and all the way to very interesting things and very important things in terms of industrial capacity and financial activities. This company is also very famous for its political scandals. Transnational corporations are usually a very strong power in the global politics and the global investment activities and opportunities. They are sometimes very important in terms of taking very important decisions by lobby groups and by other important environmental agencies, the stock markets, very, very many very interesting activities as well. In the 20th century, China became the greatest country in terms of internet users, in terms of mobile share in e-commerce, and China is the country with top 3 e-commerce firms market share. China really outpaced each and every country in the world in terms of e-business, in terms of B2C, C2C, G2B, B2G, and other e-commerce channels and production capacities, industrial chains activities. So China is really the leader in terms of e-commerce, and e-commerce corporations. Alibaba, JD.com, and Pinduoduo account for more than 90% of all digital merchandise sales in the world. That's going to be a very dramatic number. And this number increased really dramatically, both in terms of the previous growth in the e-commerce business and also when things started really getting hard during the pandemic. So e-commerce is a very important business for transnational corporations and their financial activities, especially after the launch of the smartphone business and smartphone devices, the smartphone mobile payment applications, WhatsApp programs, software, and many other things that were implemented and used by companies all across the world. These mobile payment applications became a very important part of the global settlement system, of the global or international banking transactions via digital accounts, digital wallets, electronic wallets, and other important things, very important things. So the United States is, of course, the greatest economic power still today, with lots of internet companies. Yeah, this is very paradoxically and very interesting that the United States is the country of, like we know, Amazon, Google, Facebook, the greatest companies, the greatest internet companies, the big tech companies. But China is a leader in many other activities in e-commerce, despite the United States supremacy in technology. China still cannot compete with the United States in terms of technology, in terms of patents, in terms of things such as quantum computers, or even in the semiconductor industry. Some of the companies in the United States are still leaders in the world in terms of producing chips and in terms of following the Moore's law, when the capacity of the transistors to store the value of the data increases biannually. Today, of course, this law is going to be of less value for the international markets and for international technological change, but still they are very important companies. Intel Corporation is the greatest company in terms of producing chips for companies all across the globe to provide their data and their data activities and their data storage devices. So this is a very important thing. But China is certainly going to be the leader in semiconductor industry later on in the 2030s and 2040s, when more activity is going to be replaced and to be outsourced to China. Intel is going to, of course, leave its industrial capacity, and it's going to really, I think, step down, and China is going to take the lead. Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation, TSMC, is going to be the world leader in producing chips, in producing semiconductors, which is going to be the hardcore of computers in the next generations to come, in the next decades that we're going to witness very, very soon. Also talking about e-commerce and international communications, internet industry, we cannot forget, of course, about telecommunications. Transnational corporations take large amounts of technology, large industrial activities in telecommunications industry. This industry is very, very important since we understood that during the pandemics that telecommunications are very, very imminent source of data. This is a very crucial linking mechanism, a very important bridge between nations and companies all across the world. We could not be conversing, we cannot communicate without Zoom, without Microsoft Teams. We cannot do anything without this global network of cables and this global network of broadband internet and other facilities. We also, this period of time of ours which we live in is very characteristic of company supremacy in many industrial points of view, so to speak. Today we're going to witness the one of the largest and greatest change in telecommunication devices. We're going to switch on to 5G networks. 5 generation networks are going to be the leading or the basis of the infrastructure in the coming decades, and the countries and economies, companies, international, transnational corporations that are going to lead this process will be on the edge, on the technological edge, and they will outpace other companies and other nations with their extractive industries, with their combustion engine manufacturing and many other things. So these companies are really, and this business, telecommunications, is going to be very, very important. Also, if we analyze their data, if we analyze the price share dynamics of the greatest telecommunications companies in the past months and weeks, we will find that their share prices are also increasing really dramatically. Companies such as Vodafone, AT&T, British Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, MTS of Russia, China Mobile and other companies are going to gain much from this wave of epidemics, because, like I said, telecommunications became a very crucial part of our life when people are getting closer to their homes, and life became very, very risky in terms of getting infected, in terms of getting killed by this COVID-19 disease. So we're going to witness a very important change also in this sort of sphere. Also, what we're going to see in the coming months and years is that telecommunications industry is going to be more and more separate. It's going to be more fragmented. China and the United States are going to compete, are going to try to push forward their telecommunication standards, their information standards, and digital standards. And of course, other democratic countries in the world are going to follow the United States standards. And maybe other countries, emerging countries of authoritarian rule, countries such as Russia, India, could follow Chinese standards, and other Asian countries as well. Perhaps they're going to employ the Chinese way of life in terms of telecommunications. What the world needs, though, in order to be global in scope and nature, because Internet is the system of systems. That's the global system that provides communications to everyone on the planet. What we need a sort of an organization which is very similar to the World Trade Organization, with its international body that surveys, monitors, and examines and sanctions the world of trade, of imports and exports. They set the rules for international trade, for countries to participate in the liberal trade between countries. It is responsible for liberalizing cross-border activities. They are a very important organization to deal with international trade conflicts. And 2019, 2021 are the years of great trade wars between the United States, China, and China mostly. The European Union is really kind of a neutral entity, kind of a neutral mega negotiator in the world of trade, because European companies, the European TNCs, are very interested in investments into the Chinese market, and China is really too large a market for them to lose and to ignore. So the European companies, the European TNCs, are still going to invest and work with China, although the United States is harshly opposing this process, and that's why they're so furious about implementing sanctions on Nord Stream 2 and other projects with Russia's participation and China's participation as well. Like we know, Huawei was the company who wanted to provide to the rest of the world 5G network facilities at a very low price, at a very low cost, to the European countries and even to the United States. But the United States and European countries, the EU decided to sanction Huawei and ban it from providing these 5G spectrum to the EU and the United States. So that was a very important point in the international negotiation activities that really led to the way of things that we are having today. And this way of things is that the world, which really needs some sort of a world digital organization, just like the World Trade Organization, the World Digital Organization would deal with standards for digital products, for digitization in the sphere of, in the many industries across the globe, digitizing activities of people and companies across the globe, in setting principles and rules, that so that the global internet telecommunication system and internet would be a single entity and not a fragmented thing of the United States or the European Union taken together, the democratic world and the world around China. So this is really not going to be very good for the world economy and for the international corporations, for transnational corporations that are crossing the borders. This is not going to be very great for their financials, because when you delink, and these links, those breaks and the links will lead to the loss of capacity, to the loss of competitiveness, lots of profits and returns. The United States companies, transnational corporations, will suffer as well from that, because China is a very large market, too large to ignore, too large to leave aside from the general negotiation process. We need a global digital organization who would deal with such things. But the United States, the European Union, they would like to, like they say, to create a sort of a technological alliance that would involve Western democracies with participation of countries close to the United States and the European Union, especially the NATO allies, these sort of countries. What they're afraid of is that China is going to spy in the United States. They're going to steal their technology, the technology of American companies, the technology and know-how of the European corporations. So they are very, very busy in terms of doing that sort of general activity and that sort of general slump in the global communications networks. I think that this is certainly not going to be very helpful for the people in this world. People would suffer greatly, and I think they would really gain much if companies and the governments in the world would be more cooperative in this sort of way. I think the globe as a whole would benefit very much from the global digital environment that would be part of some sort of a standard that would be understandable and clear to everyone, so that each and every country would participate in this great network and this great negotiation process, digital process, with digital products to be produced. I think that 3D printing will not be a very useful technology without this sort of global telecommunications network. Then we would like to continue, and we will talk about the infrastructure. We continue. So telecommunications is also a sort of a infrastructure business. We're going to talk now about investment into a real infrastructure. 2020-2021 are going to be very important in terms of international corporations going to countries and investing into their infrastructure. In the United States and Europe, we see very obsolete infrastructure in maritime ports, railroads, highways. So everything in the United States, in Europe and other Western democracy needs a sort of a improvement, a sort of reconstruction and development. Also, emerging countries of the world are really in need of international capital for the same purposes. if we look at the graph, which shows an increase on a year earlier basis, we would see and we would conclude that the countries of the world, mostly emerging countries of the world, were very in need of the international capital for their infrastructure projects. Advanced economies and low income developing countries were sort of stagnating in the 1990s, from the mid 1980s to 2000s, and later it became clear, and maybe I think the transnational corporations started investing more into low income developing countries who were really in need of an upgrade. China, as percent of GDP, is an absolute leader in terms of infrastructure investment. In 1992, 2007, and 2017, these 3 years under analysis were the largest in terms of investments into China's infrastructure. And this also happens despite the fact that China's GDP in 1992 was way smaller than that of 2017. And actually, this share in the infrastructure investments as a share of GDP in China really increased, despite the fact that the total GDP actually quintupled and quadrupled, increased maybe 10 or 15-fold from back to 1992. So we cannot even compare China's GDP in that sort of way in terms of infrastructure investment. We can also say that infrastructure is a very important business for public-private partnership activities. Public-private partnership as a sort of a government and corporate cooperation process and mechanism that allows to attract both public finances and corporate finances, private finances, financial resources. So public-private partnerships, these PPPs, are going to be very important in the next couple of years. If we look at these charts of greenfield investments and other activities and private investments in infrastructure as share of GDP and world private investment deals, private infrastructure deals in the world, we see that mostly the primary markets really were kind of stagnating and actually started declining all the way from 2010 down to less than 50, almost $50 billion of world private investment in infrastructure deals. And the secondary markets, in terms of existing assets, were increasing in value all the way from 2010. They were very dramatically expanded back in 2018. Then they slowed a bit, and for 2020 and 2021 we do not have data yet. Because actually in 2020 is a very bad year for PPPs, because in many countries of the world there were slumps of activities, there were lockdowns, so no investment was going into those countries, and many projects were delayed or postponed or put off altogether. So I think when the data get published in a couple of maybe months about these 2020 figure about investment opportunities and PPPs in the world, I think we're going to see a very negative, a very pessimistic picture. Also, what kind of development and what kind of dynamics we can see on charts 3 is world private investment in infrastructure in terms of PPPs, and they started decreasing from 2010 to 2019. They decreased almost down to $30 billion. Public-private partnership, this is an invention of the UK. This is the birthplace of the idea to provide capital for infrastructure facilities, to build highways, to build schools, social infrastructure, to improve healthcare in the country. And that was a very great idea, but it was not kind of successful for those companies and for those countries who were involved in those activities trying to attract private capital. Private capital is a very precious thing. It is a very important asset, both in terms of producing wealth and value added for people and for the economy. It is also very important in terms of providing technology, in terms of providing money to people who are interested in developing their own business, in developing mines, in developing natural resources and things such as these. So this is absolutely an important thing to do, but world situation, the situation in the world and examples, case studies suggest that public-private partnerships are not really effective in dealing with economic problems. So basically what they're aimed at, those PPPs, is to try to make countries of the world more equal, to be more on the equal footing, so that the standard of living of those countries would be more or less equal and evenly distributed, so that they do not have those large discrepancies between some of the regions in their countries, the depressed regions and high-profile regions. So just like in China, China may be a very great country, one of the most powerful economies in the world, with the greatest transnational corporations and financial capacity of those companies to invest, but still this country is very divided. It has provinces that are very developed, like Guangdong or Shenzhen or Sichuan, but there are also provinces in the north and in the west of China, in the far west of China, in the Uyghur province, Xinjiang, and Inner Mongolia. So those provinces are very, very outdated, with obsolete and morally exhausted working capital and industrial facilities, and they need investments, they need homes, they need everything there. They need increases in salaries, in wages, because those people who live in those provinces are very lacking in basic infrastructure, in the basic things such as healthcare and schools and education. So PPP is a very important instrument for developing regional differences, for eliminating the, regional differences, but still in countries in such large countries such as China or Russia, this is going to be very difficult, and you will have to put billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars in order to get something. And also you've got the problem of corruption and money laundering, which is also going to be very pressing for those industries in Russia or in China. Infrastructure, telecommunications, they all involve adopting new technology, of course. Without the new technology, we cannot think about the transnational cooperations activities in the world. We cannot think about those companies' facilities, those companies' abilities to provide capital, to provide more or less very important investment projects and PPP activities and PPP contracts in those countries. So it's going to be very difficult without the TNCs. Here are usually the drivers behind the process of adopting new technology. And we got to talk about those technologies. So what are those technologies going to be? This graph is called doing Asimov proud. Asimov, like we know, is a well-known author of sci-fi, science fiction novels about computer technologies and robotics and cyber technology, cyber attacks and hackers and things such as these, about computers, quantum computers. So it's a very interesting way of describing the technological revolution, industrial revolution in the world that is happening right now. And when we are talking about the TNCs adopting those technologies, we can compare what's currently going on in using those very interesting technologies. Ironically or skeptically, some people, some experts and economists say that blockchain is an outdated technology already, and maybe it is not an outdated technology, it is a very new technology in terms of its implementation, but according to McKinsey and Deloitte, he surveyed some of the companies, some of the greatest transnational corporations and their managers. So their surveys, their polls, found that blockchain is a very poorly used technology. Actually, it is on the back list of the high-performing technologies in the international corporations. The first and foremost technology to be used, according to the polls and according to surveys of McKinsey and Deloitte, include sensors and automatic identification. So where 40% of respondents said that they are already using those technologies currently, and project to increase using sensors and automatic identification systems somewhere in the future. And I think this explains a lot of things that we have today with epidemics and social distancing, because we really need technologies that involve automatic identification systems. when the United States and Europe started implementing their fiscal policies and their financial help to people, those handouts, both in terms of checks and just simple transfer money from the government to the public, the government was confronted with a problem, or faced a problem of automatic identification. So people sometimes some used fraudulent activities, and they just impersonated or did something on part of the people really in need of the money, and they could not get it because the system, the automatic identification system in the United States, was really outdated and is still really outdated in comparison to countries such as South Korea or Japan or Singapore, who are the very leaders in these sort of things, in this sort of industry, in automatic identification techniques. Also, what we're going to see is like those managers in the manufacturing company said, 40% of respondents said that they are currently using robotics and automation technologies, and they're going to use them more in the future as well. So sensors, automatic identification systems, robotics and automation, Internet of Things, wearable and mobile technology, 3D printing, autonomous vehicles and drones. Well, actually, there are some sort of deviations in them, but still the highest priority, like we see, the greatest, the most widely used technologies in the world and the international corporations are going to be the first two: sensors, automatic identification systems, and robotics and automation. So these technologies are going to lead the world of the corporate world, the world of business in the coming decades. According to the polls, he suggested that sort of dynamics. This explains a lot because companies across the globe are starting to redevelop the way of they organize their activities in supply chain activities. So they're going to be more precise in dealing with things such as delivering goods and services, in terms of automating some production facilities, because in the pandemics, when people were forced to go home and be part of a home office, to share a home office, so especially the industrial companies, the industrial TNCs, decided that robotics and automation is a very important sphere to invest. We need more robots to replace people, because robots cannot be infected, cannot be affected by anything. Well, there are of course some factors, environmental factors. They can be earthquakes or wildfires, and those companies' facilities would be destroyed after that. But still, I think that those technologies will help those companies go from that. Internet of Things and wearable mobile technologies plus 3D printing, well, more or less on the equal terms. Although it must be said that 3D printing which was very enthusiastically accepted initially when we only started talking about Industrial Revolution 4.0 back in 2015 or 2016, especially at the World Economic Forum and Davos and other economic forums, financial forums, all across the world, in Japan and Russia and China. So they all said that 3D printing is going to be technology number one, and it's going to bring technological revolution. Well, nothing of the sort. 3D printing, blockchain, artificial intelligence are going to be used, but not so much as robotics, robots and sensors and automatic identification systems. So this is a very important thing. Artificial intelligence, which is a very important tool both for companies and people, because in artificial intelligence is not only a technology. This is going to be an instrument for governments, for people in the government and corporations to control people's wants, what they want and what they would like to purchase. It's going to predict the people's behavior in many industries across the industrial world, across the global cross-border deals. So I think that once COVID-19 is finished, and until this thing is finished, there would be some very dramatic changes on parts of the TNCs in using those technologies as well. So they're going to be delivering more automated products. They're going to deliver more capabilities and facilities that provide that sort of basis for companies to speak of very high-flying technologies, sci-fi technologies. And since the start of COVID-19 outbreak, that was also a very important question to be asked. Has your company's or business area's adoption of the following technology trends changed? This is also a very interesting question. Deloitte and McKinsey say that this sphere of international technological change and industrial revolution is going to show really the processes that are going to be overwhelming and outpacing, accelerating in the global world of industries, transnational corporations and investment opportunities. And in this sort of way, supply chain digitization, the process when supply chains become more digital because of delinking, because of lockdowns, because of trade wars and conflicts, because of countries getting going their separate ways. So this technology is going to be of less importance than, for example, artificial intelligence and automation. Talking about artificial intelligence also, it is very important and useful to understand that the moral aspects of artificial intelligence that's going to be used by transnational companies all across the world. Now, what are those moral things? First of all, of course, artificial intelligence is not very good at understanding the specific features of human beings involved in the production processes. So it's going to make mistakes still, and even more stupid mistakes than most humans do. They cannot distinguish between some sort of human beings and animals. They're very difficult at distinguishing between monkeys and people. They're very harsh also to people of minorities and other groups of people with diminished capabilities. Well, actually, artificial intelligence, which is, of course, it is being used in marketing, in sales, because it's going to get to know to people's behavior, to what they buy. It may decrease the level of crime. It may do many other positive things, but actually, artificial intelligence is very difficult to understand for humans. It is very difficult to be used as an automation system. But in terms of financial markets, what can be said about artificial intelligence and automation is that more and more financial activity on the market is going to happen via robots and artificial intelligence and automation. I think this is going to be a very good and positive trend because people, human beings, do not play by the rules. They usually break the rules, and the result of those rule breaks is world crisis, flash crash, or Great Depressions, Great Recessions, and things such as these. Because human beings sometimes use practices, financial practices that destroy the entire markets and may lead to collapse of some of the most important business operations in the world and business chains, supply chains in the world. They're going to destroy. They may destroy that, of course, and it's going to be a great blow. Because, like I said, people do not follow the rules. They would not like to observe the rules. They usually break those rules because they are very motivated by higher profits that come out of great fluctuations. And actually those fluctuations in share prices and bond prices, commodity prices, foreign exchange prices, everything is employed and deployed by human beings to the detriment of the system. With the introduction of artificial intelligence and robots into trading activities with financial assets in the global financial markets, I think robots will follow the rules. And they would, and artificial intelligence will also follow the rules because they live by and they observe the rules that are set by specific algorithms. These algorithms is a thing of a sort of a standard that's going to be very important and a very mitigating effective measure. It's going to mitigate the financial risk, foreign exchange risk of companies and people involved in the business. So I think that these technologies are going to be more and more useful. And also, we know that artificial intelligence is going to be used in taxis and self-driving cars. Some people say that this is going to be really dangerous. In Russia, for instance, this is dangerous. But still, well, there are people who say that this is not really too bad. Just like I said, human beings do not observe rules. So they break rules, they drive faster than they should have driven, they do other illegal things, they do many other nasty things on the road. So actually this is not a very good thing, a human being involved in a car accident or something of the sort. But artificial intelligence is a sort of a prerequisite maybe for future risk mitigation on transport, the decrease in casualty rates and things such as these. Perhaps. We still do not know how it's going to work because everything changes, the environment changes, and it requires huge amounts of information to be stored in order to understand the navigation capacity of those artificial intelligence units and things such as these. So it's really going to be very, very difficult to understand the thinking and the way of thinking behind those technology entities and technology items. But still, they are quite interesting to be introduced, and there are many eager people who would like to see them implemented in industry, in car making, in car driving, and many other spheres. But like I said, I think that although some people say that robots introduce some sort of uncertainty to the markets, I don't think that this is really so. I think, on the contrary, they would bring more stability to the markets and less fluctuations of the currencies against the US dollar or the euro. So I think that's going to be a very, very important thing in the few years to come, which is really going to impress the whole world, and which is really going to impress the countries involved in developing those sort of technologies. Let's talk about, we are talking about, of course, the pandemic impact. And this impact is also going to affect corporations' activities in many countries of the world. So what we have here is the sort of a prognosis for the economies in the world to recover after the pandemics. The chart given is very characteristic and very it provides a very interesting and very specific view of the economy development, GDP dynamics in the greatest advanced countries of the world. What we see here is the number of days or weeks of lockdowns in Germany, Britain, France, and the United States. In the United States, there was a permanent lockdown all the way since the start of the pandemics. In France, Germany, and Britain, there were lockdowns, and they differed in the scope and the duration, in their duration. In Germany, lockdowns were the shortest, like we see, and this is a very interesting thing, that despite very narrow periods of lockdowns in Germany, the dynamics of the GDP dynamics in these three countries looks almost the same. So there was first a very dramatic slump down, there was a recession, then the markets and the economy started to rebound, and they really rebounded very dramatically. They provided lots of fiscal packages, they provided lots of fiscal facilities, furlough schemes, some wealth transfers to people out of work, out of job. Part-time jobs were guaranteed, and the economies of those countries started to recover really quickly. But after that we see another slump, and the second lockdown, and we do not know what's going to happen after that. So the very big question in these terms, in this period of our life today, is that how long will it take for the countries in Europe, in the United States, Russia, how long is it going to take for those countries to get to the pre-pandemic level of their economic development? And the United States almost touched it, but later slumped again. So despite these huge stimulus packages that were provided to people all across the advanced nations, I think these fiscal stimulation packages were not really enough, or maybe they were quite enough, because we're talking about trillions of US dollars for people to be used and invested in that period of time. But still, what is clear is that those countries with their stimulus packages, I don't think they quite understand what's going on, and why the amount of money they introduce to the markets and to people, so those handouts they provided to the population, actually I don't think that they are absolutely effective, those measures, and this graphic shows how much they depended. Actually, we may see that this economic activity, especially in some of the countries, is going to get down even further. So the lockdowns and pandemics are going to affect really dramatically in many countries. And the same goes for transnational corporations and their financials, because during the pandemics they are not able to produce to the full capacity. They have to close down their facilities. They got to outlay people to make them redundant. They are going to optimize their cost structure. So this is going to be a period of economic slump and economic recession. The situation may deteriorate, so the United States and the European Union are planning more fiscal packages, more stimulus for the economies, for them to recover more quickly to the pre-pandemic level and start growing again. So now it seems that all those projections about V recovery or some sort of very dramatic increase in the markets, and the economies of the world was really overestimated. What we see is that this is going to be a sort of a V-shaped dynamics, but this V is has a very sharp inclination down to zero, down into the negative territory of economic gains and activity. The majority of economies in the world and the corporations with them function at 80 or 90% capacity. And some people, some economists call these economies now 90% economies. And this term was coined, I think, by the Economist magazine during the pandemics in the spring of 2020. And they said that actually whatever the reason and whatever the problems that are going to be characteristic of those economies and those people during the pandemics, this is going to be a very difficult thing, a very difficult situation to overcome, a very difficult crisis for the governments and corporations to solve. Crises changed across the decades that followed after the Great Depression. People thought that they learned how to manage those crises. The United States Federal Reserve and Parliament worked together to produce rules, especially after the global financial crisis, but still those rules were not quite enough for these countries and for those economies and corporations to recover really quickly. And now we see that countries and their fiscal packages are going to run out. And now the next important question about those effects is how much is it going to impact the companies and the economies when when there's going to be a prolonged recession and a prolonged sort of business activities on part of the government and companies. Especially we're talking about inflation measure. Inflation is a very important measure for business, for businesses, for small businesses, middle-sized businesses. It is very important for transnational corporations because inflation eats away the cost of goods and services, and it really damages the company ability to provide more products of very high quality and very cost effectively. So the effects of the pandemics are going to continue and spread all the way to maybe 2021, 2022. The IMF and the World Bank project that the advanced economies, mostly the OECD country, which is a club or an association of rich countries, some 30 countries of the world, considered the most important and the most powerful economic powerhouses in the world, so they're going to be outpacing and developing new economic strategies how to deal with the pandemic. So maybe inflation is going to be a very serious problem for those economies and for the corporations. Also, why inflation is so dangerous for transnational corporations and their financials is that inflation rates, high inflation rates, eat out the value of the company, its total market capitalization, and that's why it's going to mislead the shareholders, it's going to mislead the government, what the company is doing. It's a sort of a fraudulent activity on part of the companies. He would like to have more of that, and it's going to be a real problem for the companies to be understood and to be greater learned. Also, a positive effect of those fiscal packages and easy monetary policy is that interest rates are really low. So it makes for companies, for transnational corporations to borrow at low cost and develop their activities all across the globe. So that means the pandemics actually may help transnational corporations get cheaper credit from the banks and other credit organizations and institutions. So I think it's also going to impact really positively on the international business. But still, after those packages ended, and now they're contemplating of introducing more packages. In Europe they're talking about trillions of euros. In the United States they talk about a couple of trillion US dollars of more stimulus package. So I think this whole situation is going to lead into infinity, and you cannot solve the problems of the international economy and international companies just by way of printing presses. When you print too much money, this is always going to lead to inflation, and perhaps today inflation expectations are not so cannot be so much spotted by economists and governments, and they think that this is going to continue to infinity, but this is not, and especially in today's circumstances, it's going to have a really dramatic impact and really dramatic changes in the world and things such as these. The pandemics, I also mentioned something of the sort. The pandemics really impacted and negatively affected extractive TNCs. It really led to a slump in oil prices, and it damaged the business, and it damaged the future corporate profits. It led to delays in oil shipments and deliveries. It led to accelerating funds and accelerating oil reserves. The United States, which under Donald Trump's administration became country #1 in oil exports and oil production, was very, very disappointed about the fact that the oil prices started going down. But later on, in the following quarters of 2020, the metals, oil and other things, other commodities, stopped being to be obliged to do something in this sort of way. And I think that the most important dynamics in this market activity was actually when commodity prices started rising again, and the prospect of rising commodity prices really brightened the skies of oil companies and other extractive companies. Russia, he suffered really dearly during the pandemics. The Russian ruble collapsed almost, so to speak, down to 8 rubles a dollar. There were other projections, he were even more pessimistic about that. Later, ruble started strengthening. By June the 8th, ruble strengthened really good. But after that, this period ended and there was a new impulse, and ruble started to devalue actually. That was a very unfortunate event for the Russian taxpayers, for the Russian people, for the Russian customers and consumers. He cannot go away without some technological devices and gadgets that are very costly and very expensive things, because Russia does not have high-tech things and technology to produce those things. So it's going to be leads to devastating effects for companies and countries in general across the world. Today, these prices started to sort of stabilizing dynamics. They lead a very stable dynamics. Gold really stabilized in the markets, in the financial system, and that means today actually we do not see and we do not predict more cataclysmic things. So the market is going to develop really smoothly. Everything depends on the economic policy of the United States. If they introduce more fiscal packages, of course that's going to weaken the dollar and drive the gold prices up. If something is going to happen to Nord Stream 2 and other international sanctions against Russia or China, this is going to cause a Russian ruble to decline and the depreciation of Russian ruble even further, and China's currency getting more and more under pressure from the financial markets. So I think we've covered lots of things about the transnational corporations and their finances during the past 2 hours, and I think that we got to getting closer to the conclusion of this lecture. We've covered lots of things from technology sphere, from financial activities of transnational corporations, their technological bases, and other really important things. We've talked about the impact of the pandemics, which is also very important in terms of economic development in today's circumstances for transnational corporations, for their investment in infrastructure and telecommunications. We've talked a lot about e-commerce and its role in providing more services across the globe, and what are the major things behind integration processes today, and what's going to happen with Britain and other countries that are not willing to participate in regional integration activities. And we also talked about market mania and rush in the global financial markets of investors to buy into more financial assets. I think that the end result of these speculations is going to be a new bubble, a new financial bubble, and all bubbles explode. And perhaps this bubble, this explosion, is going to lead into another world financial crisis, the likes of which we did not see during the Great Depression and the world financial crisis, or the dot-com bust of the early 2000s, because of that cash that they injected in huge amounts into the international financial system and the monetary system. So I think that's going to be, we got to be very cautious, and the governments across the world have to be very cautious about these things, and they should not do more dramatic, introduce more drastic measures about that. Dear students, thank you very much for your attention. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask? Maybe there was something not really understandable, and